Let's talk Wolfman. I saw it last Monday and I've had some time to collect my thoughts, and this should be an interesting conversation. People love horror, but especially in January, regardless of quality. And Wolfman is at least recognizable. It's the most recent entry in this emerging trend of remaking classic monster movies. Obviously Invisible Man, which Leigh Whannel also did. We're getting Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein later in 2025. But this one is another attempt at modernizing a classic story that was originally told in like the 40s. Whether that's a good or bad thing, we'll get into that. So for the first half, or like first 3/4 of this video, we'll do completely spoiler free, and then we'll get into more spoiler territory towards the end. In order to have a very intelligent conversation, we do need to get into the nitty gritty. For those who are watching who have no intention in watching the actual movie, and maybe you don't know the actual plot of the movie, here's what it says verbatim according to the Internet Movie Database. A family at a remote farmhouse is attacked by an unseen animal, but as night stretches on, father begins to transform into something unrecognizable. Yeah, sure, that's essentially the plot, but there are some important distinctions that we'll get into later. And before we really get into it, I want the record to show that I was excited for Wolfman. Cautiously optimistic, but I was excited. Video proof exists on YouTube of me putting Wolfman as my most anticipated movie of January. Leigh Whannel as a director, as a writer, even as an actor, is someone I really admire. He has a distinct style that I personally really vibe with, and I thought that style would meld really well with something like Wolfman. And that's the first strength of Wolfman. While I don't think Wolfman is as strong visually or doesn't have that same visual flair as something like The Invisible Man or even Upgrade, the best moments of Wolfman are when Leigh Whannel is able to experiment with his camera, with sound, or with perspective. Something we don't get often in werewolf movies is the victim's POV of transforming into the werewolf, the mental and physical pains of said transformation. And in so many ways, this version of Wolfman will be much more reminiscent of something like David Cronenberg's The Fly, a man slowly changing into something more sinister, something more primal. And like The Fly, as the transformation becomes more visceral, we get closer and closer to that animal, there is a decent amount of body horror, which from a visual and practical standpoint, I think looks great. Leigh Whannel as a director and writer is not afraid to push buttons, and that shouldn't be surprising considering he's one of the guys behind the Saw movies. So as we get deeper into the night, the body horror gets more intense. Christopher Abbott plays Blake, the character that changes into the titular Wolfman, and I think he's a good Wolfman. I say that with some questioning inflection because at times he feels a little restrained. But a lot of the issues that I'm finding with this movie are stemming from the script. This recent obsession of wanting to modernize classic monster movies, or just classic movies in general, in the attempt to modernize them, the new movies are lacking or drained of a lot of soul and style. And this is not to say that these classic movies don't have timeless themes. They very obviously do. But I think I'm starting to get generational trauma from all of the generational trauma tropes in recent movies. And look, generational trauma is a valid theme to want to dissect and explore, and Wolfman can be that vehicle for said exploration. It's just done incredibly half-heartedly in this movie. There's no real attempt to dig deeper into the familial relationships. In fact, I would go as far to say the family is woefully underwritten, especially Julia Garner's character. So what we're left with is this puddle-deep unpacking of generational trauma, and honestly, a movie that becomes extremely repetitive and ultimately exhausting. There were times where the movie felt like it wanted to venture into the realm of contagion and sickness and quarantine, and in a post-COVID world, I think that would have been really interesting, but it's abandoned fairly quickly. And let's say you're somebody who cares less about what the movie's trying to do thematically. Well, narratively, the story that it's trying to tell is simply not that interesting. The movie is just not very fun. Whannel is very skilled at creating and maintaining tension. I'll give the movie that. But aside from a few scenes here and there is no sense of excitement. Now, the conspiracy theorist in me believes that's less of a Leigh Whannel problem and possibly more of a Blumhouse problem, handcuffing Whannel's creative vision, but I have no evidence of that, and it's purely speculation. I don't want to go too far backward, but I want to quickly shout out some of the technical aspects, specifically the sound design, which I found incredibly immersive. However, this movie does belong on the list of movies where I'm begging for better lighting. What is that famous tweet or Facebook post? Men, get off your phone, stop being influencers. We need more gaffers. That is this movie to a T. So those are my spoiler-free thoughts. If you want to see the final score of the movie, skip to the end of the video. If you want to hear the spoiler-filled discussion, press on. This is your warning though. I will be discussing spoilers. Here we go. Let's start with something positive. My favorite scene in the movie, which I sort of alluded to earlier. There's this great scene where Blake, Chris Rabbitt's character, is in the beginning stages of his transformation, and he's hearing these extremely loud, almost like thumps. And when he investigates the sound, it turns out it's a spider walking on the wall. A big spider, by the way, but a spider. And I thought this was a brilliant and sort of terrifying way to illustrate how his hearing is getting stronger, and I desperately wish there were more scenes just like this. Earlier I talked about The Fly, and I think it's a very cool idea, maybe a bit ambitious, to essentially make the werewolf version of The Fly. I say ambitious because The Fly is a masterpiece, but The Fly succeeds for a variety of reasons, but one of those reasons is that Brundle does not transform into The Fly overnight. Brundle is experiencing his transformation over several days. There are lows, but also there are highs. There are times where he even revels in the transformation. His character, bottom line, has an arc. And as an audience, we're on the roller coaster of highs and lows with Brundle. So once we do get towards the end, which, spoiler alert for The Fly, the Brundle Fly's death actually has weight to it. And then you look at Wolfman and things feel rushed, half-baked, and even a little cluttered. It's trying to do this balancing act of being a creature feature horror movie, a family drama of Blake's immediate family, his wife and his daughter, and also a family drama of Blake and his own father, that last one being the least interesting of them all. Now granted, there is a good amount of development between Blake and his daughter, which is why the finale of the movie is somewhat compelling, but a lot of the family dynamic in this movie is completely derailed by the strange decision to throw in a second werewolf. Not only was it a strange decision to include the werewolf, but the movie seems weirdly obsessed with framing this as a shocking twist that the werewolf was his father, which seems fairly obvious. And that's fine. I'm not one to harp on predictability as a negative, but when the movie puts all of its energy into something that is fairly irrelevant, that's when the movie feels really bogged down. And then the movie goes into full MCU mode, and we get a werewolf showdown, and I realized at that point I was checking out. We've abandoned the intimacy of the story, the tension of the transformation, and have entered the big CGI fight scene. Somewhere here, there is a good movie. It's just buried under mountains of ideas and a weak script. And for a movie coming from the director of Invisible Man, a movie that I think handles the modernization of a classic story extremely well, that movie feels fresh. It oozes with style. Wolfman strangely feels neutered. Some bark, no bite. Let me know what you thought of Wolfman down in the comments, and of course, be sure to like and subscribe to this video. TikTok is likely gonna die, and I hope to do these a lot more.